Awakening of the sleeping gods, triggered by a kick to the temple door, the Orion glided silently through the vast emptiness of space, its sleek hull cutting through the dark with the quiet hum of its engines. Captain Liam Shaw stood at the helm, staring out at the endless stretch of stars. His mind was on the mission ahead, one that seemed more like a simple excavation than anything else. He had led his crew to a distant, forgotten world, far from the bustling trade routes and thriving colonies. This place was different. It was ancient, its surface scarred by time and neglect, its secrets hidden beneath layers of dust and ruin. A perfect place for discovery, or so they thought. "Captain, we're almost there," Grace Mitchell said from behind him, her voice calm but with a note of excitement. She was his second in command, sharp-minded and always ready to dive into the unknown. Grace had been with Liam for years, and together they had explored many strange and fascinating places. But this world, this temple they were about to investigate, was different. There was something about it that felt off. Liam nodded without turning. "I know. Let's keep our wits about us. This isn't just another dig." The planet they were approaching was called Velora, a world that had long been abandoned by its original inhabitants. It was said to be home to a once great civilization, a people who had mysteriously vanished without a trace. The only evidence of their existence was a massive, ancient temple, half buried beneath the surface. It had remained untouched for centuries, untouched by time and untouched by explorers. Until now. The Orion landed softly on the cracked surface of Velora, kicking up a small cloud of dust. The crew, consisting of 5 men and women, quickly gathered their gear and prepared to explore the ruins. The air outside was dry, the temperature uncomfortably hot under the light of the distant sun. The planet felt desolate, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Liam led the way, Grace by his side. They stepped into the temple's entrance, a large archway covered in strange markings. The doorway had been sealed for as long as anyone could remember, but after months of research, the crew had finally located the entrance, hidden beneath layers of rock. Now they were standing at the threshold of something ancient, something forgotten. The temple stretched out before them, dark and silent. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and decay. The walls were lined with faded carvings depicting scenes that Liam couldn't make sense of. There were figures, humanoid in shape, with strange, elongated limbs. Some seemed to be kneeling in reverence, while others stood tall, their faces frozen in eternal silence. The paintings, though faded, seemed to come alive as the crew moved deeper into the temple. "Look at this," Grace said, brushing her hand across one of the walls. Her fingers left faint traces on the stone as she examined the intricate designs. "These symbols, they look like a form of writing, but I've never seen anything like it." Liam leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the symbols. "It's ancient. Maybe even older than the records suggest. We'll need to send this back for translation." The team moved cautiously through the temple, each step echoing through the empty halls. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in on them, the air growing thicker with each passing minute. It felt as if they were being watched, though no eyes could be seen. Suddenly, one of the crew members, a young man named James Cooper, stumbled forward. He had been walking ahead of the group, his attention focused on the ground. He'd tripped over something, a pile of debris that had once been a statue, now reduced to rubble. As he tried to steady himself, his foot struck something hidden beneath the debris. It was a door. A heavy metal door, old and rusted, but still intact. "Hey, I found something," James called out, his voice carrying through the hall. Liam and Grace hurried over to him. They crouched beside James, examining the door. It was larger than any door they had seen before, its surface covered in strange markings. At the center of the door was a large, circular symbol, an intricate pattern that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. "Is this it?" Grace asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The entrance to the inner chamber?" Liam stared at the door, his instincts telling him to be cautious. "It could be, but we have to be careful. This place has been sealed for a reason." The crew gathered around, looking at the door with a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was clear that something important lay behind it, something that had been waiting for centuries to be uncovered. But what exactly that was, no one knew. James, eager to make his mark on the mission, reached out and placed his hand on the door's surface. As soon as he touched it, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the stone beneath their feet. The symbols on the door began to glow faintly, casting an eerie light across the chamber. "What the hell?" James muttered, taking his hand away quickly. Liam's eyes widened. Back away, James. This isn't just a door. This is some kind of mechanism. Before anyone could react, James, with his usual boldness, stepped forward again. He gave the door a swift kick, hoping to jar it open. The impact was enough to send a shockwave through the room. The hum grew louder, reverberating through the stone, shaking the walls. There was a loud creaking sound, followed by a sharp crack. The door shifted slightly, then froze. For a moment there was silence, and then everything changed. The ground trembled beneath their feet, sending dust and debris cascading from the ceiling. The walls of the temple began to crack, as if something deep within was stirring. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the halls, growing louder with each passing second. Liam's heart raced. "Everyone get back, now!" The crew scrambled away from the door, but it was too late. The rumbling grew louder, and suddenly the very foundation of the temple began to shake. A blinding light burst from the cracks in the door, flooding the room with an otherworldly glow. The team shielded their eyes, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding around them. The air was thick with power, as if the entire temple were alive, awakening after centuries of slumber. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. The light faded, leaving only a heavy silence in its wake. Liam opened his eyes, his breath caught in his chest. The door, which had once been solid and unmoving, was now ajar, a narrow crack through which a faint glow seeped. It was as if the very heart of the temple had been stirred by James's kick. "Captain," Grace said, her voice trembling. "What the hell just happened?" Liam didn't answer immediately. His mind raced, trying to piece together what they had just witnessed. There was no doubt about it, the temple had reacted to the kick. But why, and what had been awakened inside? "We're not alone in here," Liam said softly, his voice laced with uncertainty. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Get ready, everyone, we're going inside." The team nodded, their faces a mix of fear and anticipation. The door was open, but what lay beyond it was unknown. But one thing was certain. Whatever had been disturbed in the temple was no longer resting. It had been awakened, and the consequences of that awakening were about to unfold in ways they couldn't yet imagine. As they prepared to enter the inner sanctum of the temple, none of them knew that the kick to the door had not just triggered a physical reaction. It had set off a chain of events that would change the course of the galaxy forever. The team stood at the threshold of the door, unsure whether to take the next step. The soft glow that had emanated from the crack in the door had faded, leaving only the faintest trace of light to guide their way. Liam Shaw, his face set in determination, took a slow, measured breath. The air inside the temple felt thick and heavy, and the walls seemed to be closing in around them. "Stay close, everyone," Liam said quietly, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of tension. "We don't know what we're dealing with." Grace Mitchell, his second-in-command, was right beside him. She nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the room ahead. The others followed, their movements cautious but filled with curiosity. James Cooper, the young crew member who had kicked the door, seemed both excited and nervous at the same time. He had not expected the temple to react in such a dramatic way, but now that it had, the thought of what they might find excited him more than anything. Liam led the way, stepping through the crack in the door and into the next chamber. The room was vast, much larger than any of them had anticipated. It stretched far into the darkness, the walls lined with towering pillars that seemed to touch the ceiling, which was lost in shadow. The faint glow that had been emitted from the door was now completely gone, leaving them in near-complete darkness. The only light came from the small torches they carried, their flames flickering weakly against the oppressive silence. "Spread out," Liam instructed. "Careful, stay alert." As the team moved deeper into the chamber, they began to notice strange carvings on the walls. These carvings were unlike anything they had seen before. They were not the usual markings of an ancient civilization. They were more alive. The images seemed to shift as they moved, as if the carvings were watching them, reacting to their presence. Grace approached one of the carvings, her fingers brushing lightly against the surface. They don't look like any language I've ever seen," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "It's almost like they're breathing." Liam moved closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the carvings. They depicted strange beings, figures with elongated limbs, faces that seemed to blend into the surroundings, and eyes that appeared both human and otherworldly. The images were unsettling, their meaning unclear. "We need to gather more information," Liam said, his voice firm. "We're not leaving until we know exactly what's going on here." The crew continued to explore, each of them finding something that stirred a sense of unease in them. The carvings, the strange symbols, and the eerie silence of the temple were all building up to something big. But what was it? What had they awakened? As they ventured deeper into the temple, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, more charged, as if something unseen was watching them, waiting. And then, suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled once more. The rumble was low at first, like a distant thunderclap, but it quickly grew louder, shaking the walls of the temple. Liam grabbed the nearest pillar to steady himself, his heart racing. "Everyone, stay calm," he shouted over the noise. "Find cover." The tremors intensified, causing dust to rain down from the ceiling. The crew scrambled to find safety, their hearts pounding in their chests. But then, just as quickly as the shaking had begun, it stopped. For a long moment, the only sound in the chamber was the ragged breathing of the crew members. They exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what had just happened. Had they triggered something more? Had they disturbed whatever had been slumbering within the temple? Liam looked around, his instincts telling him to be cautious. "Let's move. We need to keep going." With tense steps, the team pressed on, deeper into the temple's labyrinth. The deeper they went, the more it felt like they were being drawn into something far beyond their understanding. It wasn't just a temple anymore, it was a living entity, and they had only just begun to uncover its secrets. Eventually, they reached another set of doors, larger than the first. These doors were intricately designed, covered in the same strange carvings as the walls. At the center of the doors was a large, circular symbol, similar to the one they had seen earlier. This time, however, the symbol was pulsing with light, faint but unmistakable. "This is it," Grace said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is the heart of the temple." Liam nodded, his eyes narrowing. "We need to be careful. Something tells me this is where it all started." James, still eager to prove himself, stepped forward. "Should we open it?" Liam hesitated. He had no idea what lay beyond these doors, but the pulse of energy that emanated from the symbol was undeniable. It was a force, ancient and powerful, and it was calling them forward. "We're not leaving until we know the truth," Liam said firmly. "But we need to be prepared. Everyone, get ready." Grace and the rest of the crew took their positions, their hands hovering over their weapons, ready for whatever might come next. With a deep breath, Liam stepped forward and placed his hand on the center of the symbol. The moment his fingers made contact, the doors slowly began to open, the low rumble growing louder. As the doors creaked open, the team stepped into the inner chamber. What they saw inside took their breath away. The room was massive, its floor covered in a smooth, reflective surface. At the center of the room stood a massive statue, larger than any building they had ever seen. It was a figure of a god, tall and imposing with outstretched arms, its face frozen in a look of intense concentration. The statue seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if it were alive, breathing. Liam's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the gods. The ones spoken of in the legends, they had found them. "These are the sleeping gods," Grace whispered in awe. "They were real." Liam swallowed hard. "They've been asleep for too long, and now they're awake." But as they stood there, staring at the statue, the ground began to tremble again. This time, it wasn't just the temple shaking, it was the very foundation of the world itself. The walls cracked, and the statue began to move, its eyes glowing with an ancient, terrifying light. A voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant, like thunder rolling across the sky. It was not a voice they could understand, but they could feel it, deep in their bones. It was the voice of the gods, and it was calling out to them. Liam took a step back, his mind racing. "We need to leave now," but it was too late. The gods had awakened, and there was no turning back. The moment the gods began to stir, the temple itself seemed to groan in protest. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, and the walls cracked open wider, releasing bursts of dust and debris into the air. The statue in the center of the room shifted, its once stiff arms raising slowly, as if it were waking up from a long, deep sleep. The eyes of the figure lit up with an intense, blinding glow, and an unearthly hum filled the air. Liam Shaw felt his heart race. This was more than they had bargained for. They had known they were dealing with something ancient, but the reality of it was far more terrifying than anything they had imagined. The gods, beings of unimaginable power, were not just legends. They were real, and they were angry. "Captain," Grace Mitchell shouted, her voice barely audible over the noise of the temple's rumbling. "We need to get out of here now." Liam nodded grimly, but his feet felt frozen to the ground. The temple was collapsing around them, and yet, despite the danger, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something much bigger. This wasn't just about survival anymore. They had awoken something, and now they needed to understand what it was before it tore the galaxy apart. "Everyone, listen to me," Liam shouted, trying to keep his voice steady. "We can't fight these gods with force. We need to outsmart them. We need to understand what's going on." James Cooper, who had been standing wide-eyed in the corner, seemed to snap out of his daze. "What do we do now, Captain?" he asked, his voice shaking. "We find the source," Liam said, his voice firm. "We need to figure out what's making them react like this. What triggered their awakening?" Grace and the rest of the crew quickly regrouped around him. They knew there was no turning back now. If they didn't figure this out, the consequences could be catastrophic. Liam took a deep breath, trying to push aside the panic that threatened to take over. He turned to his crew and said, "We'll split up. James, you and Clara stay here and watch the statue. Grace, Dr. Harris, and I will look for clues. Stay close and don't do anything without my order." Without waiting for a response, he motioned for Grace and Dr. Harris to follow him. They moved quickly through the chamber, their feet stumbling over the uneven ground. The temple was shaking more violently now, the ceiling groaning under the strain of the gods' awakening. The light from the statue's eyes flashed like lightning, casting long shadows across the room. "Do you think we've gone too far?" Grace asked quietly, her voice filled with concern. Liam's gaze was fixed ahead, but he answered with determination. "We had to know the truth, and now we have to stop it, Doctor." Victor Harris, the historian on their team, was trailing behind them, his eyes scanning the walls for any sign of information. He had been studying ancient texts for years, but even he couldn't have predicted what they had just uncovered. "There's something here," he said suddenly, stopping in front of a set of carvings on the wall. "These symbols, they're not just decorations, they're part of a pattern." Liam stepped forward, squinting at the symbols. They were similar to the ones they had seen earlier, but this set was different. The markings here seemed to pulse, almost as if they were alive. "What do they mean?" Harris's brow furrowed as he studied the carvings. "It's hard to say for sure, but I think these are instructions, written by the original inhabitants of this temple. It looks like they were trying to keep the gods locked away, but something went wrong." Grace crouched beside Harris, her eyes scanning the markings. "Do you think this could be the key to stopping them?" "It could be," Harris said slowly, his voice uncertain. "But I'm not sure how. These symbols seem to be linked to the gods themselves. They're the ones who are keeping them locked away. If we could reverse this, maybe we could send them back into their slumber." Liam's eyes narrowed. "That's a big maybe, but we have no choice. We have to try." They continued to study the carvings, trying to make sense of the cryptic messages. The statue's glow seemed to intensify, its eyes burning brighter with every passing second. The air grew thick with energy, making it harder to think clearly. The gods were awake, and their power was beginning to spread. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently. A loud crack echoed through the temple, followed by the sound of something huge shifting in the distance. The walls groaned, and the entire structure seemed to bend under the weight of the awakening gods. "We don't have much time," Liam said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to find the source of their power, and we need to do it fast." They rushed through the temple, moving as quickly as they could, but the shaking made it nearly impossible to keep their balance. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling, filling the air with choking clouds. The light from the statue grew brighter, and the hum of the temple grew louder, filling their ears. "Over there," Grace shouted, pointing toward a set of doors at the far end of the chamber. They were massive, made of the same stone as the rest of the temple, but unlike the other doors, they were untouched by time. The symbols on the surface of the doors were glowing, pulsing with an energy that made the hair on the back of their necks stand up. Liam didn't hesitate. "That's it, we go through those doors." They rushed toward the doors, but as they neared, a blinding light flared up in front of them, blocking their path. The light was so bright that they had to shield their eyes, unable to see what lay beyond. "Captain," Grace shouted, panic creeping into her voice. "What's happening?" Liam gritted his teeth, pushing forward despite the overwhelming energy. "We're close, we have to keep going." He reached out, touching the surface of the door. The moment his hand made contact, The light flared brighter, and the ground trembled beneath them. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished, leaving only a faint glow in its wake. The doors slowly creaked open, revealing what lay beyond. The room was vast, more enormous than anything they had encountered so far. It was filled with strange, glowing crystals that hovered in midair, casting an eerie light over everything. At the center of the room stood a massive pedestal, and upon it rested a glowing orb. Liam's breath caught in his chest. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the source of their power." But before they could move closer, a deafening roar echoed through the temple. The statue in the main chamber had come to life, its massive form moving toward them with terrifying speed. Its eyes glowed with an intense, blinding light, and its arms swung through the air, sending shockwaves through the ground. Liam turned to his crew. "We have to destroy that orb. It's the key to stopping them." Without waiting for a response, he charged toward the pedestal. The rest of the team followed, their hearts pounding with fear and determination. They knew that this was their only chance to stop the gods from completely breaking free. The orb pulsed with energy as they approached, its light growing more intense. Liam could feel the power radiating from it, and he knew that destroying it would come at a great cost. But there was no other choice. The gods had to be stopped before it was too late. The room felt like it was closing in around them, the air thick with the hum of ancient power. The orb at the center of the pedestal pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats, its glow growing brighter and stronger with every passing second. The ground beneath their feet trembled, sending waves of dust and debris into the air. Outside, the temple continued to shake, as though the entire structure was reacting to the orb's power. Liam Shaw, sweat trickling down his forehead, took a deep breath. His heart pounded in his chest, but he knew there was no turning back now. They were standing at the edge of the abyss, and only one thing could save them all. He turned to Grace, her eyes wide with fear but filled with determination. "We have to destroy it," Liam said firmly, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Grace nodded, her grip tightening around the weapon she held. "How?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with tension. Liam glanced at Dr. Harris, who had been studying the symbols and carvings on the walls. He could see the historian's mind racing, searching for an answer. "Any ideas, Dr. Harris?" he asked. Harris looked up, his face pale but resolute. "The orb, it's connected to the gods. If we can sever that connection, maybe we can stop them, but we don't have much time." Liam nodded. "We'll have to try." The sound of the statue's footsteps echoed through the chamber. It was coming closer, its massive form moving with an unnatural speed. The air seemed to vibrate with its every step. Liam turned to face the pedestal, his eyes fixed on the orb. "James, Clara, stay back." "Don't get too close," Liam warned. "We don't know what will happen when we try to destroy it." James Cooper, who had been standing off to the side, his eyes wide with fear and excitement, nodded quickly. "Got it, Captain." Clara Moore, another member of the crew, held her weapon ready but said nothing. She was prepared to do whatever it took to protect the team. Liam and Grace moved forward together, their steps cautious but determined. They knew that they were about to face the ultimate test. The statue's presence loomed in the back of their minds, but they pushed the fear aside. There was no room for doubt now. As they reached the pedestal, the orb seemed to glow even brighter, as if it sensed their presence. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground and into their bones. Liam felt his pulse quicken. The power radiating from the orb was overwhelming. "We need to weaken its connection to the gods," Liam muttered. "But how?" Grace's eyes scanned the pedestal, looking for any sign of weakness. She stepped forward and touched the base of the orb. The moment her fingers made contact, a sudden surge of energy shot through her body. She gasped, her muscles locking up as she felt the pulse of the orb flow through her. "Grace!" Liam shouted, reaching out to grab her arm. She shook her head, struggling to regain control of herself. "I'm okay," she said through gritted teeth, her voice strained. It's trying to take control. It wants me to feel its power." Liam's heart raced, but he kept his grip on her. "Stay strong. We have to destroy it, or we're all doomed." Grace nodded, her eyes narrowing in determination. "I'll hold on. You figure out how to destroy it." Liam's eyes darted around the room, scanning for anything that might help. The walls were covered in the same symbols they had seen earlier, but none of them seemed to offer a clear solution. The pulsing orb at the center of the room was the only thing that mattered now. In desperation, Liam stepped closer to the pedestal and placed his hand on the orb. The moment his skin touched the surface, he felt a powerful jolt of energy shoot through his body, far stronger than what Grace had felt. His vision blurred and he staggered back, almost falling to the ground. But in that moment he understood. The orb wasn't just a source of power, it was a conduit, a way for the gods to reach into the material world and spread their influence. If they destroyed the orb, they could sever the connection and stop the gods from fully awakening. Liam's mind raced. He couldn't do this alone. He needed Grace's help. With every ounce of strength left in him, he called out to her. "Grace, we need to destroy it together." "Do you understand?" Grace nodded slowly, her body trembling but her will unbroken. "I'm with you, Captain. Let's do this." The two of them stood together, their hands now pressed firmly against the orb. The energy flowing from it was overwhelming, but they both pushed through, drawing on the strength that had kept them going this far. Together, they focused all their energy on the orb, willing it to break, to shatter, to end. A bright flash of light filled the room as the orb began to crack. The hum grew louder, reaching a deafening crescendo. The walls of the temple shook violently, dust and debris falling from the ceiling. The god statue's eyes glowed brighter than ever, its massive form looming in the distance, but still they pressed on. Then, with a final, ear-splitting crack, the orb shattered. For a moment, everything went silent. Liam felt the pressure release from his body, the overwhelming force of the orb's power dissipating. He opened his eyes, blinking against the brightness, and saw Grace standing beside him, her face pale but resolute. They had done it. The connection had been severed. But just as they thought they were safe, the ground beneath them began to shake again. This time it was worse than before. The entire temple was crumbling, its ancient structure unable to withstand the destruction of the orb. "We need to get out," Grace shouted, her voice filled with panic. Liam turned to face the rest of the crew. "Head for the exit, now!" They ran, the shaking getting worse with every step. The walls were cracking, and chunks of stone began to fall from above. The temple was collapsing, and they had no time to waste. They had to escape before it was too late. The crew sprinted toward the entrance, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they neared the exit, the ground beneath their feet gave way, and the temple began to collapse around them. Dust and rubble filled the air, choking them as they fought to move faster. Liam reached the exit first, turning to look back at the crumbling structure. His eyes widened as he saw the god statue, its massive form still standing tall, its glowing eyes now dimmed. It was as if the gods had finally been returned to their slumber. "Come on," Liam shouted, urging the others to keep moving. They made it out of the temple just as the entire structure collapsed in a thunderous crash. The dust settled and the rumbling stopped. For a moment there was only silence. They had done it. They had stopped the gods from fully awakening, but they knew this was only a temporary victory. The temple was gone, but the memory of the gods would live on. The galaxy would never forget what had happened on Velora. Liam turned to his crew, his face weary but determined. "We've won this battle, but the war isn't over. We need to find out what else is out there and make sure it doesn't awaken." As they turned to leave, none of them knew what the future held, but one thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same again.